morning. I'm Claire Murphy. Welcome to the Solo Bureau. I did get some messages yesterday, specifically from those of you in Queensland and WA. There was no show yesterday, and that is because you celebrate the King's birthday in September and October, respectively. The rest of us do so in June, and it was a public holiday where I was yesterday. So sorry about that. We are back this morning. I'm obviously doing this solo, hence the name of the show, so there might be days like public holidays where I am not available, but I will always let you know. On the way later today, I'm going to be speaking to Jenine Waters. She's an HR expert, and she reached out to me to share some insights on how to best handle redundancy, and that is something a lot of Aussies, including myself, are facing this year. But let's see what's happening in the world while you've been sleeping first. It's Tuesday, June 9. Advocacy groups are warning that cuts to the National Disability Insurance Scheme will unfairly impact women and children. A government inquiry into proposed NDIS changes is this week expected to hear evidence that the changes, which are being explored in an attempt to bring rising costs under control, will hit the mothers of disabled children hardest, even if their child is an adult. Of the $16.6 billion in savings the government is chasing, $11 billion of that will come from eligibility changes, with a range of measures to be taken in the short term, including removing access to social and community participation programs, which means clients will have to rely more heavily on family to help them participate in everyday activities, including accessing medical appointments, social activities and their jobs. Detailed modelling from the Grattan Institute shows the savings can't be achieved without shifting costs onto families and informal carers, most of which are women, who currently make up more than 71% of all primary carers in Australia. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has offered a state funeral for world-renowned pathologist and cancer researcher Richard Scolyer, who passed away on the weekend. Mr Albanese spoke about his former neighbour and friend, calling him a truly remarkable man, announcing the state funeral would be held to remember the 59-year-old who'd been fighting brain cancer for 3 years. He was initially only given just 6 to 8 months to live when he was diagnosed in 2023. Scolyer defied the odds, applying the same immunotherapy principles he'd been using in his groundbreaking melanoma research to create new treatments that are now helping save the lives of others. The treatment helped keep the disease at bay for almost 2 years before the tumour returned early last year. Despite the new and devastating diagnosis, Scolyer vowed to fight to the end, saying, "At worst, I'll leave the legacy of increased scientific knowledge to benefit brain cancer patients." An offshore 7.8 magnitude earthquake has hit the southern Philippines, causing widespread damage and taking at least 32 lives. Buildings collapsed and a 1-metre tsunami wave swamped the nearby coastline after the quake, which was centred off Mindanao. The tremor also triggered a landslide in a village in the Sarangani province, killing 13 people. Thousands of villagers have now been displaced, with around 200 people injured. After an appeal from US President Donald Trump, Israel and Iran have promised to stop attacking each other. The increasing strikes from both sides were threatening to derail the fragile ceasefire struck back in April. Israel struck Iranian targets after Iranian forces fired towards Israeli territory late Sunday. Iran saying it was retaliation for Israeli attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iran's military headquarters responded, saying the operations of the armed forces are hereby declared halted. However, it is emphasised that if the aggressions and acts of mischief continue, including in southern Lebanon, much more severe and crushing actions than before will follow. Today's show host Savannah Guthrie has opened up about how she's surviving 4 months after the disappearance and suspected kidnapping of her 84-year-old mother. Guthrie, appearing alongside her close friend and colleague Jenna Bush-Hager, said she sometimes found it hard to even look at her friend for fear she'll break down, but that the few hours she spends working, while it doesn't stop the thoughts, is a reprieve from the pain.
You know, when I see you in the morning, I know that you see me, no matter what is going on. And sometimes it's almost too much, because I feel like to do the job, I gotta keep it together, pull it together, you know. But I'm happy to be back, and it's like the 2 hours of my day that it's not that I'm not thinking about it, because I am. Yeah. But it's something to do, and yes. It brings me a lot of joy to be with everybody. Yeah. But no, it's not easy.
Nancy Guthrie went missing from her home in February this year. Police believe she was taken by a man caught on her home's Ring camera, wearing gloves and a balaclava. The investigation into her disappearance has so far not led to any information on her whereabouts. A Queensland couple has reportedly donated a massive $40 million to MND research after seeing the big freeze game at the MCG yesterday. The news was shared on the AFL program The Agenda Setters that Quentin and Kylie Burt, who own a construction company, had already promised to donate $10 million to the cause, but after attending the King's birthday public holiday game where celebrities slide into a pool of freezing water and the coin toss was done by NRL player Jai Arrow, who was diagnosed with motor neuron disease recently, they upped it to $40 million. The donation comes just weeks after former AFL player and coach Neil Danaher, who was the inspiration behind the big freeze game, passed away from the disease. That's it for the top stories this morning, but if you're not staying for the rest of the show today, before you toddle off, I have since realised I may have made a slight error in asking you to DM me on Instagram for the wisest choice of communicating. I am asking for a bit of a pivot. I've started a Substack, which I will link to in the show notes. It's a really good way for us to become a part of a community so we can share stories and insights. I'll even drop that day's episode straight into your inbox too if you want a reminder. So if you could, click the link, get involved. Hopefully this community will grow and we can bring even more stories of our lives together. So thank you, team. If you are sticking around, up next, we're talking redundancy. If you followed me here to the Solo Bureau, you are probably very much aware that the reason I am here is because my previous employer made me redundant. It's the entire reason I actually chose to go out on my own because right now, being employed in Australia isn't as sure a thing as it was 6 months ago. In fact, many of you reached out to say that you had also been in the same boat this year. And some of you recalled the pain of being let go from jobs, not even recently, sometimes decades ago, like that wound remains fresh all these years later. There's actually quite a few of us who are facing redundancy in 2026. The national retrenchment rate has jumped to 1.9%, up from 1.3 recently. And that meant 268,000 of us will let go from our jobs. Government departments across the country are cutting staff as we speak. The Department of Home Affairs, whose staff headcount runs at about 15,000 people, put out a call for voluntary redundancies back in April. The department secretary, Stephanie Foster, said she wanted to start the financial year with staff numbers they could afford and a budget that accommodated the financial pressure. There's also been major layoffs in the tech industry sector. Atlassian, for example, recently downsized with about 30% of those roles lost, which the company specified were mostly in talent acquisition, program management and research, being from here in Australia. Co-CEOs Mike Cannon-Brookes and Scott Farquhar said the cuts, equating to around 1,600 staff members, were, in their words, to self-fund further investment in AI and enterprise sales while strengthening our financial profile. We're also changing the way we work and reorganising around our system of work to move faster.
First, I hope it goes without saying, but I want to acknowledge this is a very tough day. Days like these are among the toughest that we have as a company, and certainly the toughest that I have as a leader and we have as a collective leadership team. I hope it also goes without saying I don't make decisions like this lightly. I know there are real consequences for everybody, their families, their career plans, their friendships.
According to the Australian HR Institute's quarterly Australian Work Outlook report, which came out back in March, 19% of organisations across the country expected redundancies in the first quarter of this year. And with the US and Israel's war in Iran and rates continuing to rise, pushing the price of doing business increasingly skyward, that number may rise. Quite a few of you actually tagged me in a new initiative founded by marketing expert Tila Stevens. It's called SackedMate. It's an app for anyone who's just been made redundant or who suspects their name might be in the hat. She's started to build this community of the recently and not so recently redundant to help support each other through it, and along the way, she surveyed them to find out how they felt about their predicament. The words they used to describe the experience of being made redundant included horrible, sudden, confusing, clinical, heartbreaking, and rushed. And from the data, she found 69% of those surveyed described their offboarding process as negative, 54% didn't fully understand the paperwork they signed, and 29% weren't confident they got what they were entitled to. Tila joins us now. Tila, what motivated you to create SactMate?
Well, my most recent role was made redundant at the end of March, and that was not the first time that I've found myself unexpectedly unemployed. So yeah, I really intimately understand the feeling that as an employee, you get that one quick convo, and at the end of that, you've lost your income, you're cut off from your teammates, and while feeling completely blindsided, you have to try and work out if what you've been offered is actually a fair deal.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Because when I was made redundant, the first thing I did was start Googling. So you start Googling, like, what are my rights and how do I work out whether my redundancy package is correct and what are the laws around making me redundant? Like, you start searching all of those things, and it's a lot of information on a lot of different websites, and it sometimes can be a little bit difficult to kind of comprehend it all.
Yeah, exactly. So I find, I mean, bless our government websites, I find they feel a little bit like they take you around in circles. And it can be really hard to find like that concrete answer of, does this apply to me or not? The other options I see is, there's some wonderful career coaches out there, some different advisors that you could potentially talk to. And then depending on your budget and what you can actually afford, you might be able to reach out and engage an employment lawyer to really understand, what you've been offering and what laws apply to you.
So Tila, tell me a little bit about the SactMate app. What does it do? What's on there? How does it help us?
Yeah, so SactMate sits in that gap. So when you've gone around in circles on the government website and you maybe don't have the cash or not sure that you need to go and fork out for an employment lawyer, SactMate sits in that hole. And essentially it's a tool that will give you a clear checklist to hold your hand through that first sort of 48 hours, ticking off the practical steps of what things you need to consider, what documents you want to try and line up so that you can look at and understand them. And also some of the stuff that maybe you wouldn't think of. So like gathering up yourself a brag book, obviously without breaching any confidentiality or, clauses within the organization when you're leaving. But it helps you to pull all those things together so that you've got everything you need to really assess and understand your situation. And then beyond that, it has a way that you can check some things in terms of what rights apply to you, both nationally or within your specific state, what deadlines you might need to remember around, Fair Work Commission, things like that. We've built in a calculator so you can check the payout. We've got a little explainer there on how the tax works, and also superannuation, so which parts of your payment you should receive super on and which ones you shouldn't. And we also have built in a scanner that can look at the legal docs for you and flag anything that might look a little bit unusual, so that you're aware of what things you may want to ask questions of before you sign anything.
So you've basically constructed a redundancy toolkit.
Yes. And then beyond that, we also have a community. So once you have been through that shell-shocked phase, or even as soon as you're in that shell-shocked phase, we have a community for you to land in so that you have a whole heap of great company. Because one thing you potentially understand from the articles I've read that you've written about your first redundancy is that you can feel quite, attached to your initial role. Even if you don't have that identity attached to your role, you can also feel a lot of shame and isolation. I still felt that even though this wasn't my first redundancy. So we've built a community out where folks can come and realise that they are in great company. They're not the only person this happens to, and they're definitely not alone.
And what's the feedback been like so far?
It's been quite overwhelmingly positive. So it was what I hoped would happen, as we only went live late last week. Basically just, how helpful it is for not freaking out when you have all those practical steps in front of you. I've had lots of people message me to let me know that they wish that existed when they lost their role, or even I had someone reach out and say, I wish my mum had access to this when she lost her role. And lots of people asking, hey, I'm beyond that initial 48-hour window. How can I still be part of SactMate? And that's very much, where that community comes in.
Well, Tila, I'm sad that it isn't needed, but I'm glad that you're there for us right now. And I absolutely could have done with this a few weeks ago when it happened to me too. So thank you for creating this, and we'll put a link in our show notes to make sure people know where to go. Thanks for sharing with us.
No problems. Thanks for having me on.
Whatever the reason for the round of redundancies in your workplace, when that time comes for you, it is an incredibly difficult thing to navigate. There are emotions tied up with very big decisions that need to be made pretty quickly, and it may mean you may even need every ounce of restraint to not give in to the urge to burn the house down as you leave. Not saying that is what happened to me, but maybe it did. So when Jenine Waters, the managing director of her own company, Watershed Way, reached out to say that she could help us with some advice from someone who'd spent decades in HR departments, both in-house and as a consultant, I of course said yes. Jenine, I'm really interested to find out what it's like on the other side of the fence. Have you had to make people redundant before?
Yes, and unfortunately more times than I can count, Claire. So I've definitely run my share of restructures, small, large, and in between.
Can you just talk to me about what that process is like? Because the first phone call I got, you can't just ring someone and say, hey, you're being made redundant. Like how does it work from an HR perspective?
It's a really good question. And I think having done it now, it's probably been 30 years worth of redundancies. And I would say every single time I learn something new. And I would also say that it's a really tough balance to get between being really human and really considerate of people's feelings and also managing your risk. And to your point, dotting your I's, crossing your T's, trying to manage psychosocial risks these days is really hard. And some really simple things that you don't probably think about when you're on the receiving end of the redundancy, but things like how much notice do you give someone for a meeting? Now, I have a preference to give as little notice as possible because I don't want people sitting in the stress for long periods of time not knowing. But I also know that for some people, they want more notice and they want to be able to think things through and they want to be able to get guidance and support. So I think the biggest challenge is there is no perfect way to do it. And you just try to be as human and real as possible, but you also have to try to follow the script and say the right things and not preempt discussions over the phone and all of those things, which is the tough thing when you're on the other side of it.
The one question I think I wanted to know, and that so many people who've since reached out to me saying that they too have been made redundant this year, is why me? And I know that you cannot possibly answer that question because you're not in the minds or the offices of my previous bosses, but people want to understand the process of who is picked to be made redundant. Can you give us any insight as to how that process works?
It will really vary depending on the situation. So there might be certain circumstances where it's really obvious, an entire team is no longer going to be required to meet a new strategy. So it's not about an individual in that sense. It's, that whole team needs to go. We don't need that work done anymore. That's the most objective and where you can sit back as an individual and say, okay, I get it. In other circumstances, there may be a specific capability that they want for the future that some people have and other people don't. But that can feel quite subjective, when you're on the other side going, well, how did you decide I didn't have that capability? So sometimes it's sitting in a room as leaders trying to work through it and going, we know these people, we understand their strengths. What are the capabilities and the strengths that we need in the future, and therefore which people are going to stay and which people might be selected to leave. So it could be like that. And in other circumstances, they might ask you to apply for the job and say, look, there's 3 of you doing the job. We're only going to need 2 or 1. And so therefore you can come and go through an interview phase and you can, essentially represent yourself as to why you're the one who should stay. And I'm going to say, I don't think any of them feel great from the employee perspective. To be told you need to interview for a job doesn't feel great. It's like you've worked with me for how many years and you don't know if you want me to stay. To be told that we sat in a room and selected you doesn't feel great because you didn't feel that you had a chance to represent yourself. And I guess the only time when it's the whole group going where you can sit there and say, okay, it truly doesn't feel personal, they're pretty rare. There's usually some level of selection process that had to happen.
As you said there, it's often not personal, but damn, it feels like it. How do we navigate this situation? Say someone is listening to this right now who is maybe worried that they are about to be made redundant. How do you navigate that and try and keep the emotional side of it out of it? Because a lot is happening in that time. You need to know about, numbers and figures and timelines and expectations. Like, how do you not allow emotions become part of that conversation?
So first of all, I'm not sure that you can completely because we are human. So, the emotion will come through. And whilst I have been on the HR side of many of these discussions, I've also been made redundant twice myself. So you know, I know that it's impossible to completely remove it. I think all you can do is just try to sit down as rationally as possible and think through what questions do you have? What do you need to know to be able to come out of this in the best possible way? What would you like to ask or negotiate for? And I think when you're in the shock of the moment, you can walk out of a room going, I didn't cover everything that I wanted to cover. So my first thing would be, you don't have to in that moment. You can say at the end of a meeting, I just want to think about if I've got any other questions. I may have things that I want to ask for that I haven't thought about. Can I come back to you? So go away and then sit. They'll usually give you documents so you can sit and read through them and understand what they're saying and why they're saying it. And then you can decide how you want to go back or whether you want legal advice or support to do that. So I think being able to just take a breath in the moment and say you don't have to fully represent yourself in that first meeting. It's okay to walk out and say, I'm going to come back to you with my questions, and then sit down with someone who may be a little bit more objective than you are to help you think through those answers or think through the questions that you want to go back with, and do that as calmly and rationally as possible. Because what I will say is, as a manager going through it, as a HR person going through it, nobody in this process feels good about it. Nobody's sitting there thinking they've got everything tidied up and that they know all the answers. So it's okay to ask questions. And I think it's okay, trying to be as balanced and respectful as possible in doing that, because the people on the other end of this conversation also want to get to the best possible outcome typically.
Now, I understand that the questions that you might want to ask of your manager and the HR person in that moment may differ from industry to industry and indeed just singular workplace to the next. But what are some common questions that we should be asking if we are in that unfortunate situation where we are being made redundant?
I think it'll run across the full spectrum. So you might want to ask questions around why you were selected, especially if you feel in some way, shape, or form that it might be unfair or that you've been specifically targeted for some reason. So you might want to ask questions around the process or around whether there's other choices and options for you to stay. So often you might be eligible for redeployment, and you might want to understand more about what those redeployment options are and how you can best represent yourself for those. So there's the logistics around what is the job? Is it gone completely? And if not, what are my options to consider staying? I think then there's questions around what are my rights and what am I eligible for in the moment? So what's my actual redundancy payment? What are my leave entitlements? All of those. And are they willing to negotiate any of them? Some of them may give you a longer notice period, or there may be an opportunity to stay and work out part of it if that's important to you. So just looking through the actual logistics of the redundancy itself and trying to see if there's any opportunity to negotiate any of those elements. And then I think how you actually want to depart from the organisation, if that's the ultimate resolution, which is, how do you want it to be announced? I was pretty open when I was made redundant, and I think you have as well, Claire, in saying, hey, I was made redundant, but sometimes people don't want that. They want to actually position it in a different way. So being able to talk through those elements around how is it going to be messaged to the team, how do you want to present it externally to the organisation, what sort of references you might be able to get, all of those sorts of things. They're probably the immediate things that come to mind.
I guess the next step too, Jenine, is on the other side of it when we're looking to hire people, because at a time where there are mass redundancies, and we've seen Australia's public service sector hit with a lot of redundancies. Personally in my industry, in media, we've been seeing redundancies happen en masse for the past few years. What do we do then when we're heading back out into a jobs market where there's a flood of other very talented, skilled people, some of whom you might have even worked alongside, who are also vying for new jobs? How do you stand out to an HR department when you're sending through resumes or trying to, be the top of the pack?
I think it's really challenging, and I think there's a couple of things to consider. One is how you represent that the job that you're going after is the job that's right for you. So even if you've applied for 100 different jobs and this one is just one of a sea of them, you want to show that you are specifically interested in this role, that you have thought about either the company, the job, the purpose, whatever it is that you think you're uniquely able to deliver. Remembering in this world now, AI might be churning out 100 different letters for people to differentiate and apply themselves. So being, as genuine as you possibly can around why you think you're right for this role is important. I think also being clear in your career story around why you left the last role. Again, some people might be very openly talking about it being a redundancy. Other people may have had agreements with their firms or companies that they're delivering a different message. So being consistent in whatever that is, because there's nothing more disconcerting as a recruiter to hear inconsistent stories. It makes you start to question a person's application. And then really understanding the company that you're going for. Again, to have someone go through an interview process where you can see that they haven't really done their research, they're not really interested in the role, they're just kind of churning through, is off-putting for recruiters, I would say.
Is this just finally a good time to look at career pivot time? If your industry is one facing quite a few redundancies at the moment, is this a time where we should be going, hang on, maybe we should look at retraining or something new, something different?
I think it's personal to everyone. To your point, everybody's in different industries, but you're also in a different phases of your life. So, you're obviously going through a bit of a career pivot in the way that you deliver your services. I pivoted both times that I took redundancies. And I will say for me, I pivoted because I already had clarity in my mind that I was kind of done with what I was doing and I wanted to do something in a different way. So I would say most importantly is the chance to look inwardly and to think about what is it that is important to me in my next step? And can I achieve that in the role that I've been doing, as I've been doing it? Does the industry allow that still to happen, or do I need to think about things differently? And if so, what would that look like? And I think I was reflecting only this morning, AI is on the one hand, it feels like it's taking opportunities from people. But on the other hand, it's also giving you ways to think about the work that you do differently and to think about, well, if I wanted to go out on my own, like you have, like I have, could I do that in a different way? And could I be competitive given I've got so many tools available to me? And are there other ways I might want to use my skill sets or new skills I might want to develop that take me down a path that is more aligned to what I want to do for my next, 5 years, 10 years, whatever is speaking to you.
We're in interesting times, Jenine.
We certainly are.
It will, I think, take a little time for us to figure out how AI in particular is going to impact our workforce over the next year or two in the restructure, and whether it just means a whole bunch of new and different jobs emerge in that process too, that remains to be seen. But thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with us today. I appreciate it.
It was my absolute pleasure, and good luck with the podcast, Claire. I'm loving what you're doing.
Thanks for listening again today, friends. The support this show has received from you has been nothing short of special and spectacular. And as we continue to grow, I hope you come on this journey with me by bringing your stories to the Solo Bureau for us to share too, just like Jenine did. Make sure you join the Solo Bureau community on Substack and keep those stories, big or small, coming through. Have a great day. Catch you tomorrow on your way to whatever it is you go to each day. Hopefully, it's your non-about-to-be-made redundant job. Have a good one.